Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening. So, I came across an article and it got me to thinking about how sometimes the most, s- like insignificant ideas or the most smallest things that you don't really normally think about may have had a history. And a lot of times when people are looking for housing in, different urban areas, they wonder, well, why are things priced so high? Why are there so many rules? And so I was looking in the Los Angeles Times once again, as always. LA's land use rules were born out of racism and segregation. They're not worth fighting for. And I believe that this article came out because if you haven't been paying attention, or those who haven't known already, that we have all these detractors and distractions that usually come up. And while you're revved up about certain issues about people getting gunned down by the police, which are issues that are things to look at, things to pay attention to, but also know this that under your noses. Okay, I think there was a slight interruption or a little snafu, but go back to the article that I was talking about, or at least about to talk about. And so I'm going to shift gears. Let me see if I can go back in here to where I was. Okay, so the article reads LA's land use rules were born out of racism and segregation. They're not worth fighting for. And so this article was put out not very long ago. As a matter of fact, I just saw it today. And so it's by a Mark Villanantos, April 2nd. And I thought it was interesting. I'm going to read it. So, like many people in Los Angeles, I like detached houses. So, my family lives in a single family home that was built in 1923 by a woman from Hollywood. Houses like mine are an important part of LA's built environment, history, and the housing stock. In a region with a housing shortage and homelessness crisis, all homes are good homes. Somewhere along the way, however, our attachment to single family homes went awry. The year my house was built was the undisputed high point of housing construction in LA. So the city permitted almost 44,000 new housing units in 1923, the equivalent of 170,000 new homes in 2018. And when adjusted for the difference in population, while close to half of these were single family dwellings, 9,706 were duplexes and 14,627 were bungalow court apartments, fourplexes, mid-rise masonry apartment houses, and at that time, most of the central Los Angeles was zoned so that any type of residence could be built on a piece of land. These days, about half of the city is zoned for single family exclusively. It is illegal to have anything except a detached house and sometimes an accessory unit on close to 500,000 properties in the LA area. So, limiting what types of homes are allowed in this way has racial and class segregation. Okay, single family zoning is a worm in LA's apple, one of our original planning sins. So, State Senate Scott Weiner or Weirner D. San Francisco recently introduced a bill that would help change that. So it's called the SB 827 or 827. It would relax some of the local density and height restrictions and parking requirements on land near busy transit stops in the LA area that would allow small to medium sized apartment buildings to be built on approximately 190,000 single family zone lots, where such development has been banned for decades. That change would simultaneously take the Los Angeles back to the 1920s when zoning was more flexible and forward into 2020 by allowing the city to grow and adapt to reflect a modern, diverse metropolis. The SB 820 puts us on notice. Even if you love detached houses, they shouldn't be the only type of home that is allowed. And yet, our city leaders seem reluctant to step away from that narrow version of the LA dream. So, earlier this week, the Los Angeles City Council voted to oppose the SB 827. While some council members acknowledge that we need to do more on housing affordability, they also use metaphors like blowing up, chainsawing neighborhoods to justify rejecting SB 827. So Mayor Eric Garcetti argued that SB 827 shouldn't change single family only zoning because apartments wouldn't look right mixed with detached houses. Really? That's a question. There are plenty of neighborhoods that prove him wrong. I love walking around my community in Northeast LA and seeing the mixed duplexes, bungalows, courtyards, single family houses, dingbat apartments, and townhome style small lot subdivisions. Not to mention, it's hard to take an aesthetic complaints about taller buildings and boxy apartments seriously when so many Angelenos are living in tents under tarps or in literally in cardboard boxes. But the most cringeworthy aspect of the community's character argument is the fact that single family only rules are a legacy of racist exclusionary zoning. And so that sounds about right, in my opinion. It's sort of like going for that look that it's only single family homes and it's to a select group, people who have higher incomes, and it's all set sort of like in like a certain way where there's no apartments because that looks like people who, in the eyes of people like this, that are not really making that much money. And that's with the exclusion of condominiums and high rise units. So in the early 20th century, many private properties deeds ban owners from selling to Blacks, Asian, Latino, Jews, and so on. So, however, the southern cities tried to institutionalize that with explicitly racist zoning rules. And so the courts struck them down. Single family only zoning originated partly as a way around the court's ruling, a means to segregate neighborhoods without explicitly banning any racial or religious group. So they have a clever way of weeding folks out and racism, using racism and segregation, but in a way where they're not bold and outright saying, we don't want Blacks, we don't want Asians, we don't want Latinos, we don't want Jews. What they do is they make certain rules, and those rules apply to certain select groups, or they're going to apply to certain groups without them having to say, we don't want this group, we don't want that group, for whatever their biased reasons. They just go right ahead and put those rules into effect, much like today, what's happening. And so that's the reason why you have the problems that you do, like these bills that are being talked about and these laws that are coming into fruition, is to pretty much weed out all of the people or the groups that are not wanted. So this is what they did back in that time, and this is what is, I believe, still going on. So single family only zoning originated partly as a way around the court's ruling, a means to segregate neighborhoods without explicitly banning any racial or religious groups. Minorities, after all, could usually more easily afford apartment living than home ownership. Exactly what I was saying. So Los Angeles added single family only zoning to its code in 1921. So one of the first cities in the nation to divide houses from apartments. And so the U.S. Supreme Court eventually upheld single family zoning in the 1926 case in Ohio. The minority opinion described apartment buildings as encroaching like parasites until finally the residential character of the neighborhood and its desirability as a place of detached residences are utterly destroyed. So this type of race and class coded language has often been present when people want to restrict multifamily housing. It's echoed in a fearful rhetoric about drugs, crime, and transience we often hear as LA tries to fund and build more affordable housing and supportive housing for the homeless. So single family zoning is a worm in an LA's apple, one of our original planning sins. The challenge for Los Angeles and California today is how to bring back the building boom spirit of the past and redeem the legacy of racist land use laws. The SB 827 would help by legalizing apartments near transit and by implementing strong tenant protections. It's a shame our city's officials prefer propping up our tainted land use legacy to building enough homes for all Angelenos. So this article is in the LA Times and it's by Mark Villantos. And he's the director of LA Plus, a think tank focused on planning and housing. And that's a big issue in LA. And that's a big issue in Santa Monica. That's a not Santa Monica. I was meaning to say, actually, believe it or not, it probably is because most of these cities, everywhere you go around it, anywhere close to LA, you're going to see somewhat, there's going to be a homeless population somewhere. So I may be right in that, but I thought this article was pretty great about shedding some light as to the history of LA and the reason why housing is badly needed and why some people are not able to afford this, what they would call the American dream, having a beautiful home and the affordability or being able to be, in a apartment and go on a pathway to home ownership. And that's important for people who are wanting to begin their journey and possibly wealth building and creating a safe space for their family and environment that is welcoming them. And based on your ethnicity or your beliefs, you would want to know where you're living and what the rules are and what has happened prior to you deciding to move there and what laws do they have that are already in effect. What laws are they trying to create and what laws are they trying to abolish that may have plagued that city or that neighborhood with this type of mentality here, which is what they said is born out of racism and segregation. Because I already spoke about in previous videos about redlining rather, where that also was born out of racism and segregation. And that has to do a lot with what's going on right here. And so that shed a lot of light on that issue. But anywho's, I like to take the time to say thanks for listening, like, comment, subscribe. I really enjoy um, uh, people who have really well thought out um, comments, especially within reason that is, it's not bashing people, but to, there are going to be some heated discussions, of course. Now, I did see some comments people left about some other things. But it's good to start talking, I guess, about things because that is like a start in the right direction. For some people, it is. And then for some, it reveals what kind of people they are. If people believe that things should be the way they are, and that might shed some light on the mentality, or maybe people were born in this type of lifestyle where they feel like certain people deserve things which I've said also in videos. But anyway, with that being said, with that being said, um, so let me go down here. I'm going to read this. LA's land use rules were born out of racism and segregation. They're not worth fighting for. So if you read about that article, you don't want to read it in the LA Times. It just came out and it sheds a lot of light as to why we have some of the issues we have with the homeless crisis in the LA area, which is a big deal. And it's a big deal for some other places over by the Angel Stadium, over in other areas, other neighborhoods. There's like huge homeless population. So you always want to wonder what happened prior to what's going on now as to why it's gotten out of control. But anyway, with that being said, thanks for listening.